Welcome to Olicana Music, my name's Alistair. Today's lesson is making it musical, and we'll be talking about the Dorian Mode. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at how to really pull out the sound of the Dorian Mode in your improvisation, and therefore be more musical whilst you're using it. There are some things you're going to need to understand in order to really get the most out of this lesson. They are the major scale, intervals, Nashville numbers, and how modes are constructed. We are going to quickly recap how the modes work, but this isn't a deep dive lesson into the modes, so it'll be really beneficial if you already know how the modes work before we dive into this lesson. If you're uncertain on any of these topics, let me know in the comments. I'm more than happy to make a video on them for you where we can cover them in more detail. By the end of today's lesson, we will have recapped what the Dorian Mode is, how to make Dorian sounding chord progressions, and then how to pull out that Dorian sound in your improvisation. Make sure you watch the whole video so that you can see how all these ideas come together to create the Dorian sound. Let's dive straight into it. Let's talk about the Dorian Mode and what makes the Dorian Mode unique. The Dorian Mode is the second mode of the major scale. This means if you take the second note of any major scale and you treat it as home bass, you get the Dorian Mode. For example, if you take the C major scale and you start from the second note, which is D, you would get D Dorian. Currently, it still looks a lot like a major scale though. We've literally just taken our C major scale and started it from D. To really figure out what makes the Dorian Mode, we need to look at the intervallic formula that makes up the scale. Your ear forms relationships between the sounds it hears and the note that is being emphasized as home bass. This is what we describe as intervals. For example, in the C major scale, C is emphasized as home bass, and therefore every note is related to C. This produces a sequence of intervals. You get C to D, which is a major second, C to E, which is a major third, and so on to produce a scale formula that goes root, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, and major seventh. When you emphasize the second note of a major scale as home bass, the sequence of intervals that form the scale will change because we're using a different note as home bass. If you take the Dorian Mode, and we'll do this in the key of C, so you make D the home bass, all the notes in the scale will now get related to D, and this is going to produce an intervallic formula that goes as follows. The interval between notes 1 and 2, so D to E, is a major second. The interval between D and F, though, is a flat, also called a minor third. This process carries on to produce a scale formula that goes root, major second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, minor seventh. So you should be able to see that although D Dorian and C major share the same notes, the intervallic formulas that describe the scales are different. One of the important things about the Dorian Mode is that minor third. This gives the Dorian Mode a minor tonality, and therefore we're better comparing it to the natural minor scale or the Aeolian mode. The natural minor scale, also called the Aeolian mode, shares exactly the same notes as the major scale, but they're just starting from the sixth note of the major scale. As we saw before, this produces its own unique intervallic formula. That formula goes root, major second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh. When you compare the Dorian Mode to the natural minor scale, it's easy to see that the Dorian Mode is just a natural minor scale, but with a major sixth instead of a minor sixth. In my experience, this is how most musicians end up conceptualizing the Dorian Mode. They think of it as a natural minor scale with a major sixth. This conceptualization is useful because it allows you to use some of the tools that you already have in your toolkit, such as the minor pentatonic scale. We're going to talk about that later in the video. There's still a problem though, because if you play a C major scale and then the D Dorian Mode back to back, you probably won't hear any difference between the two. How can you hear the difference between these two scales, or any of the modes for that matter? Well, it all comes down to the way that you emphasize home bass. The mode you hear is a product of the harmony that is being implied. Therefore, if I play a C major scale over a harmony that is implying C major, you'll hear the C major scale. But if I play that same set of notes, but I imply that D is home bass and I use a Dorian harmony, then you're going to hear the Dorian Mode instead. In my opinion, harmony is the most important thing when it comes to modes, and this is because although all the modes use the same notes, it's the intervallic relationships that change, and the best way to highlight those changes in the intervals that make up the scales is by giving the listener a strong sense of where home base is, and we do this through harmony. Harmony is like the colour of the canvas on which you paint. The canvas could be white, you could paint it with a base coat of black, you could make it red, you could make it yellow, but the base coat that is on that canvas is going to inform what the colour of the paints that you put on top are. In music, harmony is a product of the combination of the chords that you're playing and the melody that goes on top of them. The chords are going to influence the quality of the melody that you create because your brain is forming a relationship between the notes in the melody and the notes in the chords. This is harmony. Therefore, if you want to sound really Dorian, you want to make sure that the harmony you are playing on top of implies a Dorian sound. So let's talk about how to do that. How can you imply a Dorian harmony? How can you figure out what chords you need to use to create a Dorian chord progression? In the same way that we figured out the intervallic formula for the Dorian mode from its parent major scale, we can also figure out the chords that are in the Dorian mode. Let's look at the chords in the major scale first. In the major scale, each note can have a chord built on top of it. So the pattern of chords that is produced by a major scale goes major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. So in the key of C, we have C major, D minor, E minor, and so on. We can number these chords based on the interval in the formula. This is the Nashville number system in action. So we get a major 1 chord, a minor 2 chord, a minor 3 chord, and so on. We can extend these chords out to include the 7th. So we'd get our major 7th chords, our minor 7th chords, the dominant 7th chords. This is important because it's going to show us where the dominant 7th chord is, and that's really going to help us show the listener where home base is. So we should see that in our major scale, we can find the dominant chord on chord number 5. So in C major, we have G7, G dominant 7, and there's our dominant chord. It's the 5 chord. Given that the Dorian mode is a minor mode, it's useful to compare its chords to those that are in the natural minor scale or the Aeolian mode. So let's do that as well. Starting on the 6th note gives us our natural minor scale, so we can use the same sequence that we'd use for our major scale, we just start from the 6th chord. So we get a pattern that follows. Minor 7th, half diminished, major 7th, minor 7th, minor 7th, major 7th, and dominant 7th. Anywhere there's a flat interval, we can make the natural number flat too, and these are the chords that are produced by our natural minor scale. Starting on the 2nd note of a major scale gives us our Dorian mode, so we can start our sequence of chords in the same place to find out the chords in the Dorian mode. The chords produced by the Dorian scale are a minor 1 chord, a minor 2 chord, a flat major 3 chord, a major 4 chord, and so on. Now that you can see the differences between the chords in the natural minor scale and the chords in the Dorian mode, we can make a few useful observations. First of all, our 2 chord is no longer half diminished, it's minor, so the minor 2 chord is a unique feature of the Dorian mode. Our 4 chord is no longer minor, it is now a dominant 7th chord, so the dominant chord in the Dorian mode is the 4 chord, and our 6th chord is no longer flat, it's just a natural 6th, and it's no longer major, it's now a half diminished chord. So now we have 3 chords that are unique to the Dorian mode, and these are the chords that we can focus on to really pull out the Dorian sound. Let's start emphasizing the Dorian mode as home base. The easiest way to do this is just to sit on the minor 1 chord and create a vamp that sits around that. Just do a 1 chord vamp that sits around the minor 1 chord. Let's do this in the key of A, so our 1 chord in A Dorian is going to be A minor 7 or A minor. I can now create a 1 chord vamp, and that would be a pretty good way of starting to create a Dorian harmony. I can play the D Dorian scale on top of that and it's going to sound absolutely fine, but there is a problem. The Dorian mode, the natural minor scale, so the Aeolian mode, and the Phrygian mode all have a minor 1 chord. So actually, I could have played A Dorian there, I could have played A minor, or I could have played A Phrygian. Any one of those scales would have worked over my minor 1 chord because they all share it. It's a common chord to every single one of those modes. It's not going to sound wrong, but what that's telling us is that a single chord vamp based on the 1 minor chord is not going to very strongly imply a Dorian harmony. It is technically correct, but there's a bit of ambiguity there because it could be any one of those 3 modes, right? It could be the Aeolian mode, it could also be the Phrygian mode, or it could be the Dorian mode. A better way of implying the Dorian harmony would be to create some movement between our chords so we can give our listener a stronger sense of which mode we are playing in. You can do this by starting on our minor 1 chord, moving to another chord that is unique to the Dorian mode, and then moving back to our 1 chord again. So maybe the easiest way of doing this would be to move from our 1 minor to our 2 minor. Staying in A Dorian, we have A minor as our 1 chord, and then B minor as our 2 chord. Another way of doing the same thing would be to move to our dominant 4 chord and then back again. This is why it was useful to spot the dominant chord earlier on. The dominant chord is going to give our chord progression a sense of instability, and it's going to make us want to cadence back to home bass. When we make that cadence back to our minor 1 chord, it's going to give the listener a real strong sense that, hey, A minor in this case, it's a minor 1 chord, this is our home bass, we've moved from the 4 to the 1 minor, that's the Dorian mode. This is the easiest way to start producing a Dorian harmony. Use your minor 1 chord and then move to other chords that are unique to the Dorian mode. So the minor 2 chord or the dominant 4 chord. Any of those movements is going to help tell the listener that our minor 1 chord is home bass, and the fact that there is a dominant 4 chord and a minor 2 chord, they are unique to the Dorian mode, and therefore the listener is going to hear the Dorian mode in your chord progression. This can be quite limiting, however. If you move to any of the other chords in the key, you might accidentally trick the listener into thinking that the minor 1 chord isn't actually home bass and that it is instead the parent major scale. So if you're playing in A Dorian, the parent major scale is G major. If you moved to, say, the D major chord and then you moved to the G major chord, that are both in that key, you'd find that the listener might be a bit unsure of what key you're actually in. Am I in A Dorian? Or am I in G major? This is where a lot of the problems with modes arise, is there I'm not strongly telling you that our minor 1 chord is home bass, and therefore if you're used to listening to songs that are in a major or minor key, as most sort of pop and rock kind of is, you might find that your ear is trying to predict that it is in fact a major key that's happening, when instead you're really trying to play in the Dorian mode. If you're limited by using the other chords, how can we still use those chords that are in the key? Well, the best way to do it is to add the note that we're trying to emphasize as home bass to all of the chords. So if I'm trying to play an A Dorian, I should make sure that every chord in my chord progression has an A note in it. If I do that, the listener's ear is going to track that A note the whole time, and they'll go, okay, A is home bass, and therefore I'm hearing a dominant 4 chord, I'm hearing a minor 2 chord, I must be in the Dorian mode. Obviously, if you want to add the note that is acting as home bass to every single chord in your progression, that takes a little bit of work to figure out the chord voicings that work for it. If you'd like to shortcut that process, you can find chord voicings that are unique to the Dorian mode and really emphasize the Dorian harmony in the lesson pack for this lesson on my website, olicanamusic.com. The link is in the description. In the lesson pack, you'll get the chord voicings, you'll get detailed notes on how to practice the concepts we're talking about in this lesson. You'll also get the backing track from the intro jam and any other sort of useful bits that really help you get the most out of this video. It's pay what you want from £1 a month, and that gets you all the lesson packs that I put out for my lessons on YouTube. It's a really great way to support what I'm doing here, so if that's something be interesting you, check out the description below where you can find the link. Now we have our harmony, now we have the chords that emphasize the Dorian mode, we can talk about improvisation and playing lead on top of it. You might think that you've now got to learn the Dorian scale in all 5 positions on the guitar and learn a whole load of new scale shapes, but if you already know the minor pentatonic scale, you've done a lot of the work already. The thing you should think about is the fact that the Dorian mode has minor tonality, and therefore it's a minor mode. So if you know the minor pentatonic scale, then you can use the minor pentatonic scale to play over any Dorian chord progression. All your minor pentatonic licks that you've learnt for playing blues and things like that are going to work great in the context of a Dorian chord progression. This is where you should start if you've never really played with Dorian before. Stick on a Dorian jam track and start trying to use the minor pentatonic scale over the top of it. Now that example is definitely not strongly implying a Dorian tonality. It's quite stable because we stuck to the minor pentatonic scale. However, the chord progression is presenting that Dorian sound, so it definitely sounds like a Dorian solo. If you want to make your solo sound more Dorian, then we're going to have to add the notes that are unique to the Dorian mode. These are the major second, you could also call it the 9th, and the major 6th. What we're going to do is we're going to add those 2 notes to our minor pentatonic scale. Sticking to A Dorian, if we play our minor pentatonic scale at the 5th fret, just box 1, the E minor shape that hopefully is the first pentatonic box you learned. Now you can add in the Dorian notes, so you can add in your 9th and you can add in your major 6th. So the 9th is found, if we play our first note of the minor pentatonic scale, the 9th is found at fret 7, and then we're going to carry on as normal, and then we get our 6th on fret 4 of the D string, carry on, and then we get our 9th again at fret 4 on the G string, carry on as before, keep playing your minor pentatonic scale, and now we get our 6th on fret 7 of the B string, carry on your minor pentatonic scale, one more 9th at fret 7 on the high E string, and then you're done. Now that you've got those new notes, as before, you should continue to use your minor pentatonic vocabulary. This is the basic vocabulary that most guitar players are going to use when they improvise. But now you can add in those 6ths and those 9ths to add a little bit more of that Dorian spice. Take the minor pentatonic vocabulary that you already have and try changing notes within those phrases to include the 6th or the 9th. So maybe you take a blues phrase. Let's just try changing the last note in that. Sounds a little bit weird on its own, but by playing the 6th at the end of that phrase, I'm giving you, the listener, a sense that, hey, this isn't just a minor pentatonic phrase, this is a Dorian phrase, and when it's played over a Dorian chord progression, if I land that 6th over our minor 1 chord, it's going to sound really Dorian, and that's exactly the effect I want to create. For me, ending on the 6th is a really good way of implying that Dorian tonality. It is the major 6th that is the key note in the Dorian mode. It is its unique note that really makes the Dorian mode what it is. So for me personally, if I want to sound very Dorian, that's a note that I tend to end phrases on in my improvisation. But obviously you can add the 9th in as well, and that's also going to add a little bit of that Dorian spice. You can obviously take all the minor pentatonic shapes you know and fill in the gaps to create 5 positions of the Dorian mode. I use the cage system to map out my minor pentatonic shapes. And all I do is I take those 5 caged shapes and I fill in the Dorian notes, and now I have the Dorian scale. You can actually do this for any mode, but obviously we're talking about Dorian today. If you'd like the caged shapes for the Dorian mode, you can find them in the lesson pack for this lesson. Link is in the description. All the general ideas that you would use for phrasing when you improvise apply to when you improvise with a mode like Dorian. So these are ideas such as motifs, call and response, using articulations, leaving space. I've done a whole video on phrasing here. All the ideas that are in that video also work for the Dorian mode and any scale that you'd like to improvise with. These ideas will really help make sure that what you're playing doesn't sound like a scale and sounds like actual music. The more Dorian you want to sound, the more you should emphasize that 6th and the 9th in your improvisation. And if things are starting to sound a little bit weird, a little bit too spicy, you can always back off a little bit, fall back on your minor pentatonic vocabulary that you already know, and it's going to sound absolutely great. That's it for Making It Musical, the Dorian mode. Thanks for watching. If you learned something new, leave the video a like, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Make sure you share this video with any guitar players that you think might find it helpful. As I mentioned, the scale diagrams, the backing tracks, the chord voicings, the practice notes are all in the lesson pack for this lesson. If you want to get the most out of this lesson, then check out the link in the description, head over to olicanamusic.com and grab the lesson pack. Next week's lesson is on how to play by ear using the musical feedback loop. If this is something that'd be interesting to you, then make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you're notified when that lesson is released. Until next time, good luck improvising with the Dorian mode, have fun creating some Dorian chord progressions and some Dorian improvisations, and I will see you for our lesson next Saturday.